Back in 1976, facing increasing pressure to offer a high-mileage small car to compete in both Europe and the US, Ford entered the subcompact or super mini market with the Fiesta. Initially built in Germany and competed in Europe with the Fiat 127 and the Renault 5, and in the US with the Chevrolet Chevette. The Fiesta would be the smallest car Ford ever developed up to that time, and its first with both a transverse front engine and front-wheel drive. Although its first generation had a short run in the US, the Fiesta would be built and sold all over the world for 4 more generations outside the US, until the One Ford marketing plan brought the Fiesta back to the US in 2011. And yet, despite a loyal fan base, Ford ended the Fiesta's US run in 2019 and worldwide sales in 2023. This is the story of the Ford Fiesta. This is my old car.
Europe's most successful new car in history comes to America. Introducing Fiesta. Now imported from Germany by Ford.
Over 3 years ago, I did a top 10 episode of the best subcompacts, based on viewer requests, and the Fiesta made that list. Considering a majority of my viewers are from the US like me, I suspect most only recall the last generation that were sold here during the 2010s, not the first gen from the 1970s. Ford pulled the first gen, or Mark I, from the US market before it finished its run in Europe. Today, if you go to Ford's webpage on the Fiesta, it says it's no longer in production, but offers a link to explore all compact vehicles. But that just takes you to a page about SUVs. That's because here in the US, SUVs and pickups is all they sell. Well, okay, they still sell the Mustang, although its dropping sale numbers make me wonder how much longer it will survive. But it was Ford's Fiesta that, many years ago, helped make Ford probably the most popular automaker in Europe that hadn't originated there. This is especially true for the UK, which was home to several automakers, and yet plenty of Fords were sold there as well.
Why not pop into your Ford dealer and test one for yourself? The Ford Fiesta.
The Fiesta wasn't the first small car that Ford of Europe offered, as before that was the Escort, which arrived in 1968.
Europe's best-selling car was created here, in the Cologne studios of Ford, Germany. New Ford Escort.
And for my US viewers, that Escort was a lot different than the one we got here starting in 1981. The Mark I and II Escorts, which sold from 1968 to 1980, were initially sold in the UK and Ireland, and were rear-wheel drive. However, by 1972, with Ford facing increasing competition in the subcompact market, as well as some inspiration from the original British Motor Corporation's Mini, Henry Ford II authorized design work to begin on a new model, with production approval near the end of 1973. In the US, Ford's smallest car was the Pinto, and was classified here as a subcompact, and yet the Fiesta would be nearly 2 feet shorter in length, easily making it the smallest car Ford would offer in the US. Although the development of the car was under the codename Bobcat, Ford's marketing team was planning on calling the new car the Bravo.
Look, out on the road! It's a car! It's a Fiesta!
It's Wonder Car.
But Henry Ford II said no, instead preferring the name Fiesta, which is Spanish for party. General Motors already had used that name on its Oldsmobile station wagons, but allowed Ford to use it for its new subcompact. Although many outside of Ford heard rumors and speculation of the new little car, it wasn't until near the end of 1975 that Ford allowed some press leaks to generate interest in the car.
Sir, your cape is showing!
The Fiesta would be Ford's first car to offer both a transversely mounted front engine and front-wheel drive. Having a front transaxle allowed for more passenger and cargo space in the rear, a strong selling point against competition like the rear-wheel drive Chevette. Another competitor was the Fiat 127, and Ford even used some Fiats as test mules for the Fiesta's 957cc 4-cylinder engine. Mark I Fiestas only had one body style, a 3-door hatchback, although it could be configured outside of the US as a panel van, with no rear seats or rear side windows. In the US, the Fiesta arrived for the 1977 model year. Ford's smallest offering here before that was the Pinto that started in 1971. By 1977, the Pinto's infamous fire risk had been known since 1972, and although the NHTSA had not yet forced a recall by that year, the bad press was causing a drop in Pinto sales, so offering an even smaller and more fuel-efficient model could provide some good press for a change. Ford used the fact that the Fiesta was built in Germany as a strong selling point, since Made in America seemed to have the opposite effect that it does today, especially when it came to cars. The Fiesta wasn't exactly fast, but weighing only 1,700 pounds, it could still be fun to drive. Although it was Ford's smallest car, in Europe it was considered a B-segment car, meaning you could go even smaller, such as the A-segment Fiat 500. But in the US, Ford was considering the replacement for the Pinto that would end in 1980, and focused their efforts on a new Escort designed exclusively for the American market that would start in 1981. As a result, imports of the Fiesta into the US ended in 1980, whereas in other countries it continued to be popular, including the UK, where it was their third best-selling car in 1981. But in 1982, British Leyland's Austin Metro was outselling the Fiesta, which led to the second-generation Fiesta starting in August of 1983 for the 1984 model year, although the second gen was the same size as the first gen, and still a three-door hatchback. The second gen could be had in XR2 trim with Ford's larger 1.6-liter CVH four-cylinder gas engine, or a 1.6-liter diesel. The standard manual transmission went from a 4 to a 5-speed, and even a CVT automatic was available starting in 1987, but could only be paired with a 1.1-liter 4, so few were ever built. The third-gen Fiesta, or Mark III, in 1989 was a significant redesign, not just a facelift like the Mark II. At 7 inches longer and 2 inches wider, the Mark III was the first Fiesta to offer a 5-door model, and a taller high-cube panel van that began in 1991, named the Courier. Yes, the same name Ford had once used on a Mazda-built pickup. More efficient engines with fuel injection were offered in various markets where emission standards required it, although fuel injection wasn't offered in the UK until 1991. A sportier Fiesta S model was offered with an 89 horsepower 1.6-liter, and later the XR2i would offer nearly 100 horsepower. Then in 1990, the Fiesta RS Turbo arrived with 14-inch wheels, anti-lock brakes, Recaro seats, and unique color moldings and RS Turbo logos. Despite its sporty intentions, it was plagued by poor steering and handling. Ford dropped the RS Turbo by 1992, not just because of the poor public reception, but also due to its higher risk of theft, and in turn higher insurance rates. But the Mark III overall would be the best-selling and longest-running generation, selling over 1 million units in just its first 2 years. The Mark III even continued to be built until 1997, even though the Mark IV started in 1995.
You may have heard us call cars wooden in the past. Well, the old Fiesta was woodier than Edward Woodward.
The Mark IV Fiesta grew 3 inches in length and a couple inches wider, and expanding its production to more countries than before. Although the Mark IV continued to be built in Germany, Spain, and the UK, it would later be expanded to Brazil, China, India, and South Africa. These Asian, African, and South American versions were also available as a 4-door sedan that was about a foot longer than the hatchback, and in some markets it was renamed the Ford Icon, whereas others simply referred to it as the Ford Fiesta sedan. The Ford Icon was especially popular in India, lasting all the way until 2011, although the European-built Fiestas would end the Mark IV by 2002. The Asian, African, and South American models continued to be built as the Mark IV well into the 2000s, with Brazil building it until 2013. The Mark IV Fiesta would be Britain's best-selling car from 1996 to 98, only to be overtaken by the then-new Ford Focus in 1999.
But I don't much care for this wood for a couple of reasons. First, it looks out of place in a car of this type, and second, it isn't wood.
A facelift was done for the Mark IV Fiesta in 1999 that incorporated Ford's new Edge design theme, which could also be seen in the Focus sold in the US.
If we are to believe statistics, then every adult in the UK would have owned a Fiesta at some time in their driving life. They seem to have been around forever.
This new look was significant enough that in Britain they referred to the facelifted version as the Mark V. Ford even offered Mazda a rebadged version of the Fiesta, called the Mazda 121. A favorite of fans of this generation of Fiesta was the Z-Tech S trim, with its 1.6-liter 16-valve Sigma engine that made 101 horsepower and had upgraded brakes, suspension, and anti-roll bars. It gained a strong enough following that aftermarket performance parts were available just for that engine.
Who's your daddy? I see you, baby.
The Mark V, or the Mark VI for the UK, started in 2002. This would be the Fiesta's best-selling generation, and the first to expand to Australia, where it replaced the Kia-based Festiva, itself a newer version of the Festiva once sold in the US from 1988 to 1993.
Germany's new Ford Fiesta. German engineering just got sexier.
This generation introduced features the original Fiesta of the 1970s couldn't even dream of, such as dual front airbags, anti-lock brakes, and much more ergonomically improved interior. The higher performance ST model offered a 148 horsepower 2-liter Duratec engine that could reach a max speed of 129 miles per hour. The ST also had 17-inch wheels, huge for a Fiesta, and even optional heated seats, another option the original Fiesta could only dream of.
And this is first.
A facelift was done in 2005 that changed the bumpers, grille, head and tail lights, Bluetooth, voice control, rain sense wipers, and more. This facelift also lifted the Fiesta to the top-selling Super Mini in the UK in 2006 and 2007. A Z-Tech S anniversary model was offered in 2007, which was supposed to commemorate the Fiesta's 30th anniversary, even though 2007 was 31 years from the first year of 1976. The Mark VI Fiesta, or Mark VII for the UK, began production in 2008, offering 3- and 5-door hatchbacks, a 4-door sedan, and a 3-door cargo van. The 4-door version was revealed to the US as the Verve concept car for the Detroit Auto Show that same year.
No keys?
Nope. Watch this.
This generation of the Fiesta was the first to utilize Ford's new One Ford marketing strategy to offer the same car worldwide, hence the reason it was shown as a concept in the US to be offered nearly 4 decades since it was last sold here. However, unlike that one, which was imported from Germany, the new Fiesta for the US, although still an import, didn't need to travel nearly as far, as it would be built in Mexico. The US version would not offer the 3-door as an option, and it also had different frame, front end, and rear bumpers to meet different US crash standards, so still technically not a world car. Production for US models started in Mexico in 2010, although the Fiesta was still built in many other countries. Ford had been selling the compact Focus in the US since 2000, a market where the average car size was growing a lot.
It's a pretty big deal.
So the decision to offer the Fiesta alongside the Focus, beginning with the 2011 model year, seemed to me at the time to be a losing effort, especially since little cars don't offer nearly as much profit as Ford's trucks and SUVs, something Ford needed after nearly going bankrupt just the year before. But once it was announced, initial demand for the new Fiesta was high, with dealers taking deposits while waiting on cars that were held up by hurricanes, tropical storms, and some quality control issues that delayed shipments to U.S. dealers.
The Fiesta may have lost, but does the Lamborghini have a capless fuel filler?
Although the first couple years of the U.S. Fiesta were just for basic transportation, that changed in 2013 with the addition of the Fiesta ST. This coincided with a mid-cycle facelift given to the Fiesta, and matched a similar look to the Focus ST. The Fiesta ST, when sold in the U.S., could only be had as a 5-door hatchback, whereas other world markets also got the 3-door ST. The Fiesta ST offered the Ford EcoBoost turbocharged 1.6-liter 4, mated to a 6-speed manual, which put out 180 horsepower. This EcoBoost engine also offered an overboost feature that could bump horsepower to nearly 200 in 15-second bursts. Not bad for a car that weighed around 2,700 pounds. This provided a 0 to 60 time of under 7 seconds, a big difference from the original Fiesta, which took twice as long to reach 60 with half the horsepower, and weighed about 1,000 pounds less. Despite these performance improvements, the ST typically only accounted for around 5% of overall Fiesta sales each year. And despite challenges such as this,
That's quite a lot deeper than I thought.
it was never offered with all-wheel drive. Fiesta sales for the 6th generation peaked in the US in 2013, with over 71,000 sold, but had dropped to 46,000 by 2017. Some of that decrease in sales was probably attributed to bad press the Fiesta got, thanks to its faulty power shift dual-clutch automatic transmission. The same problem also affected the Ford Focus.
I am now breaking the speed limit indoors.
Drivers reported gears slipping and shifts hesitating, causing premature wear in the clutches, and requiring some entire transmissions to be replaced. Multiple class action lawsuits were filed by customers that affected over 1.5 million Fiestas. Despite the ongoing cost of repairs, there was no official recall, but instead several service bulletins and extended warranties. There were also vehicle buybacks, a lot of them. So much so that by 2020, Ford admitted to spending over $47 million on buybacks alone. They also agreed to over $30 million in payouts to settle the lawsuits. Later investigations discovered that Ford management knew about this risk before the car's launch. Meanwhile, over in the UK, the Fiesta was the most popular new car sold there for almost every year between 1990 and 2020, with nearly 5 million sold. I can only assume that the power shift transmission wasn't sold nearly as often in the UK, or the car's popularity should have been affected there as well. By 2014, Ford had managed to have the highest market share of any automaker in the UK, and around half of those were Fiestas. But global sales were shrinking, and that, along with Ford's long-term plan to sell larger trucks and SUVs, not to mention all the money lost on the power shift debacle, led to Ford scaling back worldwide production of the Fiesta. The 7th and final generation, which began in 2017, would only be built in Germany. The issues with the power shift transmission presumably were solved with this new model, as the lawsuits and settlements Ford was forced to pay only affected models up through 2016. Although little cars were, and still are, popular in Europe, Ford was convinced by 2017 that they clearly lost their appeal in several world markets. The seventh and final generation Fiesta would not be imported from Germany to North America, South America, Asia, or Australia, although they made an exception for the Fiesta ST for Australia, as apparently it was popular enough there to justify the shipping costs from Germany. But clearly not popular enough for the US, as we only got leftover Fiestas starting in 2018. Those who loved the Fiesta ST were obviously disappointed, but the trend in the late 2010s and early 2020s, as far as performance models are concerned, is for bigger cars with big engine displacements. And with more EVs entering the market that can go way faster, and don't need to be tiny to make huge performance numbers, it is no surprise that little cars like the Fiesta simply couldn't be in any automaker's long-term plan. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel. If you once owned a car from the 70s to mid-2000s that you rarely see today and would like it featured in a future episode, leave a reply in the comments or contact me at the email shown here. See you next time.
Sync reads text messages aloud to Kate. That's good, because Kate can't read.